What's up, friends? Welcome to SPDM TV. My name is Mike, part of the SPDM crew, and I watch a lot of TV. We talk about various TV topics, reviews, and general appreciation of TV past and new. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Serialized at MLHilty2452 to see what all I'm watching. This week, we're going to be talking about The Americans. I'm going to admit it right off the bat. This is my favorite show of all time. So I'm really excited to talk about this. It's the critically acclaimed FX show that ran from 2013 to 2018. Premise of the show is that at the height of the Cold War, married KGB spies pose as Americans in Washington, D.C. This stars Kerry Russell, Matthew Reese, Holly, Hannah's her, whatever, Holly Taylor, Noah Emmerich, and numerous other characters. And to talk about the show, I'm happy to introduce Bonnie Garvin, who is an award-winning producer and writer, USC professor of film writing, and creator of Storytelling Labs. So, Bonnie, welcome to the show. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
reaching out.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I love talking about the Americans.
Oh, thank God. I'm so very excited because to be honest, when I talk about the show as my favorite show, a lot of people don't really know what this show is. And that's shocking to me. But I'm looking forward to talking about this with you.
Right.
So, right off the bat, what was it about the Americans that captured your attention in the first place?
Kind of two things. One was I was really curious about the premise. I thought this is going to be really corny, and I was already up for not liking it. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I like to know because I teach, I should know and do want to know what's going on in television, what people are talking about. And the second thing was that one of the creators and writers I had worked with when he was a producer because he was a producer before he became a writer. So I hadn't seen his work before. I was curious about that. So I watched it for those two reasons to start out with. And then, I mean, not only I was so hooked that when COVID came, I watched the whole thing again, but it was so cool because before where you have these breaks right after 12 weeks and it could be a year between it. But when you watch something back to back like that every day, you pick up all these really subtle things that are laid into a story that you don't get because a year's gone by and you forget X, Y, or Z.
That is actually how I watched this show. This was a choice during COVID, and I was looking for a show that I has been on my list for a while. I didn't catch it live, but like you said, I appreciate the fact that I didn't catch it live simply because I don't think I can handle waiting a week, let alone a year until the next episode or until the next season came out. And I'm thankful for the fact that it was only like a year between seasons because nowadays
Yes,
it's two, three,
ridiculous.
4 years. Granted, some of that is because of COVID, some of that is because of the strikes. I get that. And also, performers, writers, what have you, everybody gets busy as they get more opportunities and more work. I do definitely do understand that. I don't think I can handle the gaps in between seasons with how much the show hooked me because I think I took a week and I watched this show pretty much straight through.
No, I really get it. It's so compelling.
Yeah, it's just really, really great. So um let's
And the
let's
other thing
kind
I
of
loved about it was, I'm sorry,
oh
that they
god.
had great kind of twists that you didn't see coming,
Oh yeah.
particularly the ending. I mean, the ending was one of the best endings I've ever seen on TV.
Those final two episodes are just
Amazing.
outstanding. And
Really.
this we'll talk about that in terms of some of the best episodes that the show has to offer, but the finale is definitely up there in terms of the best of the series and some of the best series season finales out there because it's just filled with so much tension.
Yep.
This big moment that we've been waiting for so long between Elizabeth, Philip, and Stan. Just this final confrontation that they had in that garage. Oh, it didn't go the way that I thought it would.
But
And I think
that's what
that's
was
what I
so great
appreciated
about
about it the
me
most.
too.
Yeah.
It all didn't go that way. And the last scene altogether was just, I mean, talk about unexpected.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
was really amazing.
So we will issue a spoiler warning now. I understand that the show has been done for, it's been 7 years now.
Mhm.
So issuing a spoiler warning right off the bat because I want to talk about spoilers of this and other things that happen throughout the course of the show. So right there, that's the warning. So let's first start with the characters and kind of introduce some of our main players. So our
Okay.
main our main couple that we have here is Elizabeth, who's played by Kerry Russell, and Philip, played by Matthew Reese. So Bonnie, I'm gonna let you choose. Which one do you kind of want to talk about 1st?
Okay, I'm going to talk about Carrie Russell first
Hmm.
because I thought, oh my God, this is ridiculous. She weighs 22 ounces. She's
Hmm.
so tiny and she's going to kick the shit out of two guys.
Right.
What is so amazing is I completely bought it.
Hmm.
She created a character that was so believable that I actually could believe that little her, could kick the ass out of two big guys.
Hmm.
So that to me was in and of itself really amazing. Yeah. So I
I'm
didn't know her before and always thought of her as just as sort of cute but I had no idea she had those kind of acting chops.
So the first two things that I knew Carrie Russell from was she's one of the people on the rebooted version of the Mickey Mouse Club, the one that produced all of these, famous singers like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake. She
Wow.
was she was in that. So that was my first exposure to her. The second thing was Felicity. And I I look at who she was in Felicity, which is this timid, shy individual, and I didn't make the connection. I was like, how on
Oh,
earth is
wow.
Carrie Russell going to do this? Because up her career up until this point had kind of a type with her performances. She's
Totally.
more known for her drama. She's more known for comedy, not action. And then I went back and I watched Mission Impossible 3, which she is in, and I was like, oh, okay, I buy it. She was only in like 20 minutes of Mission Impossible 3. She wasn't in that much of it, but there was enough there where I saw, okay, I can buy that she can be an action oriented performer. So I could buy that.
Yeah.
And I think the way that she's written, particularly because she has a very checkered history
Right.
with being a woman KGB spy as well. And her journey is very different from what Philip's journey goes through. And yet she is more loyal and dedicated to the KGB than Philip is. And her missions are different as opposed to his. And all of those things kind of coalesce into a really unique story and a really unique perspective for something that I just wasn't expecting out of both Carrie Russell and just her character in general too.
Yeah, it was, I agree with you. And they were so believable because it's really hard to, I mean, you're playing two things.
Mhm.
Now you're Russian spies in this middle class neighborhood and nobody's figured it out. I mean, it's done so cleverly.
Mhm.
And even the thing at the beginning with the neighbor being an FBI agent, first it was like thought like, "Ugh, really?" But
Mhm.
it completely worked because everything was so unexpected. It wasn't what you expected. It was just the opposite. But nonetheless, it was so truthful that you just grabbed onto it. One of my favorite things was, again, like, the whole thing with Kerry Russell always kicking ass. I
Mhm.
mean, you don't expect that. You didn't expect the relationship with Stan to go the way it did. You didn't expect, and it was all set up, but it wasn't in your face. So, you could really, really believe it,
Mhm. Yeah,
accept it.
absolutely. Let's talk about Philip for a second. Philip is was Elizabeth's husband, quote unquote, but in reality, especially at first, he's more of a partner. Not they It
Mhm.
didn't seem like the relationship had a whole lot of affection or love, even though they had two kids together. They're both very dedicated to their work and their mission. Philip was a bit of a wild card throughout the course of the show, and somebody who he got a lot of the really tough missions. Not to say that Kerry Russell didn't get any of the tough missions, but he had to do a lot of interesting things where he had to manipulate people's feelings in interesting ways. Because there's a character of Martha and there's a
Oh,
character
oh
of
my God.
Kimberly
Yep,
where
Martha.
he had to, pretty much get Martha to fall in love with him. And he had to get to the point with Kimberly, who was fairly younger at the time, in order to trust him and to feel like they had a relationship and just extract information from them. And I feel like that's a role that historically may be more geared towards women. And I think that's something that I appreciated, that this show allowed the man to do that instead.
Yeah, yeah, I never thought about that, but it's true. I was obsessed with Martha. I
Mhm.
was so worried about what was going to happen to her. And then when it did happen to her, oh my God. And the other one that I loved was the Hungarian woman who got lured into it. Remember? And then she ended up in prison.
Was that Nina?
Nina,
Oh
yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that so Nina's an interesting character because of her connection to Stan. And
Yeah,
Stan, like you talked about before, Stan is a character who could have been it just could have been the foil to these two characters, and could have just been the neighbor who was tracking unknowingly tracking these two individuals. And he could have been very cliche. He could have been it could have been just a really weird character, to be in a show like this. But they gave Stan a lot of agency in terms of you get a glimpse of what his personal life is like. You get a glimpse of some of the other things that he's working on, his reputation at the Bureau. Um, he runs into a situation where he gets a little too close to an asset, in this case, Nina, and ends up doing things that just did not fall in his favor when it came to Nina, and she unfortunately paid the price for it. And I think that central storyline affected Stan throughout
yeah,
the
he
course of the
loved her.
series. Yeah, absolutely. So, um, what other thoughts do you have on Stan as a character? Because you mentioned before, I wasn't sure. You mentioned that you weren't sure it was going to work either with Stan being the neighbor, but what did you think of him throughout the course of the show?
I thought again he was really, really interesting, and I found it so amazing that this was an FBI agent, and that I felt so positively about him.
Hmm.
And because it was so smart, you could really see it from everybody's point of view. So you understood where he was coming from. You didn't see him as a bad guy. He wasn't out to hurt anybody. And he was just again, a very compelling, complex person. I mean, the scenes where, he started going to Est with, because his ex-wife, or she was still married to him at the time, went there, and he was trying to be a better husband or better person in the
Hmm.
relationship. He just didn't know how.
And the cat and mouse game that ends up happening, and they had a couple close calls, specifically Philip and Elizabeth with Stan
Right.
throughout the course of the series. But that final season is where Stan really starts to narrow in on these two as the potential individuals that he's looking for as these spies that have been that has been the thorn in his side throughout the course of the whole series. And
Right.
the last main character that I want to talk about, because we mentioned some other side characters, but Paige, who is
Yeah.
Elizabeth and Philip's youngest or oldest daughter, who she was born in America. She has, she's lived an American life. Uh, Throughout the course of her entire life, uh, grown up in American schools, has, throughout the course of the show, gets more devoted to her faith. Um, and yet, throughout the course of the show, manages to discover that her parents are spies and not who they say they are, and then ends up making a choice about whether or not she wants to follow in their footsteps. So, Bonnie, give me your thoughts on Paige as a character because I'm not going to lie, the first time I saw her, I was like, okay, she's going to be a kid. She's eventually going to discover that her parents are spies, and then that's going to be it.
Uh, She annoyed me so much at the
Yes,
beginning. I mean, really, I
absolutely.
would say to my husband when we watched it, oh, that kid, she's just driving me nuts. But over time, how they evolved her was so interesting and felt so organic. It didn't feel like anyone was getting manipulated and how she went in there with, what was his name? Father Tim or
Pastor Tim. Yeah, it was Pastor
Pastor
Tim.
Tim. Oh my
Yeah.
God. And he turned out to be a really interesting character. So
Mhm.
I like it anytime people surprise you. You think they're one thing, but then there's this whole other thing going on. And when it doesn't feel like it's out of the blue, when it's consistent with everything else, because you could have done that and you go, oh, please, but you completely bought it.
Absolutely. Yes. Paige was a character who, when she finally makes the choice, because you're not sure whether or not she's
Not at
actually
all.
going to go down this path and actually join the KGB, because you think that she's going to go off to school and or she talked a lot about what her faith means to her, which we all know that our history books that Russia and the Soviet Union at the time, they didn't really want religion to be a big thing. So, understanding full well that Elizabeth and Philip are very concerned about the whole religious aspect that Paige is bringing into the house.
Right.
Um, and Pastor Tim, like you said, interesting character, started off as somebody who you think he's got everyone's best interest at heart, and then just he starts to be concerned about Paige, about the situation at home because he's noticing all these different things about Paige's behavior and Elizabeth and Philip in general. And they immediately just seize in on the fact that he feels like a threat, and it's not good. And it's very concerning about everything that happens with Tim. But the last two kind of side characters that I wanted to ask you about, we go through a lot of handlers for Elizabeth and Philip, and there's two in particular that I kind of wanted to zero in on because they're the ones that were there the longest, or the ones that, oh, it's Frank Langella who steps in as a handler. So, um,
Yeah,
do
that
you
was
have
amazing.
do you have any recollections of characters Claudia or Gabriel in terms of what they did from a handling perspective for Elizabeth and Philip?
Boy, oh yeah, yes. One was Margot Martindale,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
She was amazing. And then Frank Langella. And then the other one I thought was interesting was the Russian guy who had a relationship with Nina as well.
Mm, yes. That was very interesting as well. Um, because that's one thing about this show, and that's actually a good segue into kind of transition about some of the themes and the writing in particular is that they do a really good job of presenting both sides of this Cold War because
Absolutely.
so many different shows, movies, different like even our own history books just paint this picture that America is good and Russia slash Soviet Union is not. And I feel like this show toes the line really well, saying it's not picking a side in particular. It is just saying, here are the two sides of this conflict, and we leave it up to you on how you interpret it. So I guess why don't we start with, kind of just some aspects about the writing that you found very compelling about the show.
You never feel like anyone's being judged.
Mm,
They're really presenting you in a way that allows you to make the decision rather than, pointing you in the direction of this person or that person. Everybody was really dimensional and believable. That was one of the things I really, really liked about it. Um, it never really tried to manipulate you around anything. And the thing about presenting both sides, it wasn't like there was some discussion about,
Hmm.
heavy discussion about politics where we compared the two. Like all good writing, it really came from the characters. So
Hmm.
we experienced what was going on through their point of view. So that was also, really, really smart. It's just really smart writing. I mean, it's great character development. I mean, your investment in the people, how it grows over the time. Um, I love the thing about how Kerry Russell and Philip, how they began to take, different kind of approaches and how they were seeing that world, right? One
Hmm.
is really being attracted to America. The other one's thinking, really, this is it? So
Hmm.
I loved that conflict between them and just the larger philosophical, question of, where they come down on all those issues. They're not always in the same place.
Yeah, with in regards to Philip and Elizabeth. So in the interest of just kind of setting a little bit of the table. So, towards the latter half of the season, Philip starts to pull away a little bit from his mission, and it gets to the point where Philip just doesn't want to do any spy work. For lack of a better word, he's done. And instead of doing all of this spy work, maybe just occasionally doing things to help Elizabeth out, he just wants to be this travel agent who has this budding business in Washington, D.C., who wants to just indulge in the American dream. And the dichotomy of what Elizabeth is going through, she has experienced what the quote unquote American dream is, and she doesn't buy it. She is super skeptical about all of this, and she's just here to for her mission to serve the Soviet Union. And that is something that I think from a storytelling perspective makes for a very interesting dynamic between this couple who are just on converging paths, and that continues to butt heads because like a lot of relationships that are written for television, there's always going to be certain crossroads that all of these people have. And this is a huge one, and one that they don't ever really resolve because by the end of the series, they're found out. They have to flee back to Russia. So they don't have a choice. So they don't end up fully solving
Right.
any of the philosophical issues, kind of like what you were talking about. They it's just here are the two sides of it, and now the mission's over, and now they have to leave.
Yeah, that was also amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, everything was unexpected, as I said, but so well thought out so that you never bumped against anything or thought, Wait a minute, how did that happen?" That kind of thing. And that's really good writing.
So this show takes place during the 1980s, which it's towards the tail end of the Cold War, and there's there's a sense that there's a changing of the scales when it comes to this conflict between America and Russia. It seems like America is continuing to be on the up and up, and then Russia it's kind of on a downward trajectory.
Yeah.
So, can you kind of talk about how setting this show in the 80s during this particular time affected kind of just the outline of the story? And do you think that having this set in the 80s was the best decision, or do you think you would set it during a different time?
No, I think that this is a perfect time to set it because there actually isn't a war going on. So it's
Mhm.
like a spy versus spy kind of thing. And what are you what were they really trying to find out, right? And what were the stakes? So, I'm sure there's always been spying by everybody on each other. But this was, I think, so unexpected, right?
Mhm.
Because they assimilated themselves so well into their environment that, you began to accept it yourself. Um, and I don't know how many families there were at that time, but I'm sure that there were some.
Mhm.
So, they're not taking something that that was a fantasy. And the other thing is, I suppose in a funny way, it also educates people about a time many of whom, they weren't alive then.
Mhm.
And I mean, history books don't really teach history, only selective parts of history.
Yeah.
So I think it was also, important to educate people around that. I mean, particularly now in light of what's going on with Russia, it's really interesting to see sort of that evolution and how different it was. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, because I'm like older than anyone on the planet, but when I was a
No.
kid going to I had to go to the orthodontist, and sometimes I go by myself on a bus when my mother couldn't take me.
Mhm.
And this is going to sound so bizarre, but I really remember this. There were, on buses or in subways, they have those placards, where people advertise and stuff.
Yeah.
This was a sign that said the words Russia, and there was a girl or sometimes a boy, and their head was all encased in chains.
Wow.
And
That
as a kid, I had no fucking idea what was going on. Well, why are these children having chains around their head? So yeah, but it really that image really burned itself into my brain.
huh. It's interesting the place that we're in now in terms of our relationship with Russia. It's very
Totally.
very interesting to kind of see we go from something like that to
Yeah. I mean,
where
how does this happen? Yeah.
yeah, that's crazy to me that
Overnight.
um
Anyway, yeah.
one thing for me that I do appreciate about the 80s setting for this is that there is a sense of nostalgia in this, but I think it's nostalgia that is done effectively versus just flashing it in our face that, hey, we're in the 80s. It's like, oh, here's a couple people playing with the Rubik's Cube. I'm like, no, Rubik's Cube actually kind of has a function in this. The way that they have the music during this show. I'll never forget during the first episode that the way they incorporated In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I thought that was brilliant. And
Mhm.
just like, first of all, I just love Phil Collins. I'm not afraid to admit it at all.
Me
But
too.
that's
Earlier, Phil Collins. I didn't like it once he got to Disney.
oh it's
I lost it then, but
yeah,
that's for a while with him.
yeah, the Genesis days and just the
Yeah,
solo
the solo album.
yeah, just
Literally wore the album out and had to get a second one.
yeah. And there was something about the way that they used certain things that happened during the 80s and having it incorporated into the story
Right.
and making it feel organic and necessary versus just like a show like I hate to pick on a show like Stranger Things who kind of does some things where it's like, hey, we're in the 80s. Remember when this happened in the 80s? Um, I will admit they do a lot of great things that showcase the 80s, but that's something that you saw a lot during this time frame, this look back at the 80s. And now we're seeing it now with a look back at the 90s with a lot of shows, a lot of movies that are coming out too. So I think the way that they incorporated certain elements of the 80s, like they talked about David Copperfield making the Statue of Liberty disappear and how that was like a national event. They talked about the opening of Epcot and how there was something so cool about Epcot opening, and it was something that was supposed to be more geared toward adults and not so much, like the Disney park. And then there was an episode that they had everyone sit down. They watched this either TV movie about the consequences of like a nuclear blast and kind of the effects and how that was like a big national event. And I didn't know that that was a thing, so I went to look that up and I was like, yeah, this big TV movie, it's called like The Day After or something like that. That was a big deal. And I think the way that they incorporated that, it felt organic and it felt like something that would happen on a day-to-day basis for these people who are living in the United States. But that's just the plight of what it means to live in America during this time, even if they were there to be spies. Bonnie, I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I
Okay.
hate when people use music at a time when there wasn't. I mean, if somebody plays a song from, you're in the 1960s and they're playing a song from 1980 or vice versa, it makes me crazy. You have
Mhm,
to have music that's in keeping with the times, and you have to use it in a way so that it really enhances the scene rather than just sort of shows you it's obvious.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Because um, there's been a lot of shows that have done that, particularly recently, where they have, and Disney has been doing this a lot lately, where they awkwardly shoehorn in a song, kind of feels like at the wrong time. Like this happened recently with like Daredevil Born Again, where the second episode ends with like uh, a really awkward song. And I was like, why did we make this choice? And the music choices that they made in this show, uh, we keep using the word smart, and I would rather have a show that's smartly written, and entertaining versus a show that, maybe makes me laugh but doesn't make me think as much as this show
Yeah,
does. And
I'm with you.
that's just one of the many things that I definitely do appreciate about this show.
Yeah, because nobody talked down to you. I mean, you had to pay attention,
Hmm.
right? So it treated you like you were an intelligent adult, and it kept you on the same page as the story and didn't stop to explain to you this is this person and they think this. And I mean, it was so clever. I mean, as I say, going back to that thing with Stan, how they were able to use that both for, and to build the tension, but in such a, again, very smart, using
Hmm.
that word again, way, because I think what we really mean by smart is truthful,
Hmm.
honest, that it totally resonates and you never bump against it and you think, yeah, I believe this. And you always felt in those scenes that you believed it.
And that's an interesting perspective, especially considering that we're talking about spies as well, who the majority of their work is dealt in deception. So the fact that the show could toe that line and not pass judgment and can be truthful to the plight of everything that's going on, and kind of looking at it, and they look at every situation in a holistic way, and they kind of just stick with, here's what we know, here's the mission,
Right.
here's what's going on, and that's it. It's not passing any judgment one way or another. And that's something that I always appreciate, a show that can toe that line and find that balance without beating us over the head over one perspective versus another, because we're faced with that on a daily basis now. This whole thing about everything is so partisan. Everything is that you're either on one side of the aisle or you're not. You've got one perspective and that's it. And the nuance that the show has to kind of present everything that's out there and give the audience enough credit to judge for themselves. That's something that we we don't get a lot of
Yeah,
now. And
I absolutely.
the trust that this group of writers and the showrunners have in its audience be savvy enough to pay attention and to know that you paying attention will pay off. And if you remain invested in this show, then callbacks to things that happened earlier are going to come back in effective ways. And that's always something that's really, really great to see. Um, in terms of kind of like other themes out there that kind of wanted to talk about, we talked a little bit about the struggle to like maintain your identity and balancing all of that out. And for Elizabeth and for Philip, they have a lot of identities to juggle. They're spies. They
Yes.
have their American life, they have their spy life, but then within their spy life, they have all these different things to juggle. So, was there ever a time watching this show that you felt overwhelmed or lost when it comes to all these different identities that you kind of had to keep track of and all these different missions that Philip and Elizabeth were doing?
I really didn't. I mean, I think they did a really good job of, and I think again that goes back to developing character so
Mhm.
that they made them dimensional enough so that they really separated out. I mean, it was really clear who everybody was in the
Mhm.
story. And I
Yeah.
think that really helps.
Yes. Yes.
And they all
So,
had some role to play in the drama. I mean, they weren't just there as figureheads. I mean, they were really making the story move, an integral part of it.
and that's something from us, like I can imagine, and grant I've never written a screenplay or anything like that. I can imagine that's really difficult to
It
do
really
because
is.
to to bring that vision to the forefront and just trying to figure out how to present it in a palatable way for an audience, but also sticking true to the vision that you have for these particular characters and the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to, both have trust in yourself and trust in the audience.
And I can imagine because you've mentioned that throughout the course of throughout the course of your career that it's I can imagine that the audience perspective and the audience in general has evolved a lot over the years. And particularly now with the audience, what's the nicest way to put this sometimes when it comes to the audience? They're not
Fragment,
always they're what?
fragmented.
Yeah. Okay.
Because they're watching 1,000 different things. There's so many channels and you don't know what
Mhm.
the hell to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can imagine that it just becomes more and more challenging to write a character that will ingratiate themselves with the audience, but still be compelling enough to even get the people who don't pay attention as much as you need them to still stick around.
Yeah, it's really tricky. And it starts off with having a really great premise and really great characters that are going to be able with a good enough problem to solve that it can carry, over into many seasons.
Well, and speaking of seasons, so this show ran for what, 5 or 6 seasons or so. Um, the way that this story progressed is that they had a lot of different storylines, uh, a lot of different things to juggle. But do you have a storyline or a couple episodes that were among your favorites?
Well, obviously, certainly the last one. The one where Martha had to leave. I love that. What else? I'm just trying to think of ones that I really I liked when they confronted Pastor Tim.
Hmm.
What other things? There were just so many. Oh, I love when she and Paige when they went out there and then she had to kick somebody's ass.
Right.
A lot of that stuff was really, really interesting. How she was bringing Paige into it and Paige's reaction. There's just so much. It's hard to just pick only a few for that reason.
Yeah, there's to me the way that this bookmarks is just the the pilot is a really strong pilot. I really enjoyed it, but the finale is going to go down as an all-timer. And it's great to see that a show can stick the landing so well and still find a way to make it so incredibly compelling. Um
You're absolutely right.
so Bonnie, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate talking to you about the Americans. So, can you let the people know where can they find you, and do you have anything that you want to plug?
Yes, I do. I want people to check out Storytelling Lab, which is a 6-week course that I created for adults, not for young people. I mean, I guess you could be young to join it, but most people are adults. Most people are professional who really want to just try something else. I say it's really not a writing class. It's more a class about really finding out who you are and connecting to it, whatever creative voice that you have. So we do lots of different kind of things. It's very driven by film and television. And as I say, it's only 6 weeks because what I'm trying to do can be done in 6 weeks. And it's Storytelling Lab online. And I encourage people to check it out. People really, I have to say, I've been so pleased with the reaction that I've had from people. I mean, and I see how it's made a difference. I mean, I have a couple people who've gotten agents, somebody else is about to get a book published, somebody else has a show played in the Fringe Festival in Scotland. So it really makes me happy to be able to, sort of be the conduit through which people can really explore their voice.
So check out Storytelling Labs. I'll be sure to link that on the episode description as well. So definitely check that out. And Bonnie, again, thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to chatting with you more down the road.
Great. I look forward to it. Thank you.